Well, hello everybody. I've just put some new strings on my bass, um, and I didn't run through that, but I can do that if you need any assistance with any ideas on how to restring properly. But virtually what I do with that is just take the old strings off, like I cut them, I feed the short ends out of the bridge, take the other ends off, then I will use a uh, lemon oil which is applied to the fretboard. I leave that on for a minute or two. I wipe it down with a clean cloth to get all the dirt off the fretboard. The next thing I do is actually polish the bass because it's easier when the strings are off. In between that, a friend of mine got me this, which is like a microfiber pad that allows you to get in under the strings and remove the dust, and a brush which is good for all those tight little areas, and that's great. I don't know where he got that. I think he got this overseas, but it's a really good thing, and I thank him for it. So once I've got the fretboard cleaned and I put the new strings on, and what I do with the strings, if I can show you with this little string here, basically some people don't know this. I mean, everybody knows how to restring, right? But if I'm going to this post here, so the E string post, I would normally put a bend in the string. So let's just say I'm going to that post, I would put a bend in the string 2 posts past that. So I put my finger there, then I would bend the string at 90 degrees, and then I would cut the excess, right? So the reason for that is, see what I've done there, is to lock the outer windings onto the core. And I think with hex core it doesn't matter so much. I do it anyway, because otherwise if you cut it while it's straight you can get a dead string, and they're expensive, right? So we want to avoid that. So I bend it at 2 posts past, then I'll put it in the post it's supposed to go into, and I should get 2 or 3 nice even wraps around the post. And that's just a little tip so you don't get dead strings. So the next step is to get the bass in tune, and it's important that we do that in the playing position always. You always want it in the playing position when you're doing any of this work. Okay. Now I tuned this previously, the E string dropped a little bit. The next part is, some people like to press the strings down over the saddles. I don't like doing that. The string has, especially the thicker ones, they have a tendency to sort of curve over the saddle, and people think that the witness point here is a bit vague if you don't do that. What I find is, once you've pressed it down, the core is bent at that point, and I know it shouldn't matter, but it doesn't always bend on the witness point. It bends a little forward of it, and sometimes I get these odd rattles where I least expect them. If I don't push them down, I find I don't get that, so I've made a habit of not doing it. The next thing is to give them a little bit of a stretch. Now, you don't want to stress the string and bend it in any way. I just put my fingers under the string, about the middle, about the 12th fret, give them a gentle pull up, just like that, not too hard. If you pull it too hard and you separate the outer windings from the core, your string will go dead. So you want to avoid that. And then just retune, and all should be good. It'll drop in pitch a little bit naturally. It'll drop in pitch after you played it for about 5 or 10 minutes. That's the case with new strings. Okay, I've put some D'Addario Pro Steels on this. The gauges are 40 to 100. They're lighter than a standard gauge 45 to 105. Your mileage will vary. You need to find a gauge basically that does what you want it to do, feels the way you want it to feel, and then set the bass up according to that, the gauge and the feel that you're expecting. The thicker the strings, the same brand, same style, these are stainless steels. The thicker they are, they're going to feel a little bit tighter. When it comes to the setup, I have a particular setup that I like and I always follow because I know my measurements. And what I did today, I was having a look at the Fender website, which tells me that the relief on a 9.5 inch radius neck like this one is 0.012 inches or 0.3 millimeters. How you measure that, I put a capo here and that frees up this hand. I fret at the last fret and I use a feeler gauge at the 7th fret, 7th to 8th fret, and I look at that and I say, okay, at the 7th fret, that's just fitting under there. Now, if the gap was bigger than I expected, I would insert my truss rod wrench and turn it clockwise. If it was too flat or smaller than I expected, I would go anti-clockwise. When you turn these things, they should turn freely, and they shouldn't require more than about an eighth or maximum quarter of a turn. If they do, there's generally something wrong. They react quite quickly. So you just want to get that measurement right, and you can always tell it's right because you can't see a gap between the feeler gauge and the string, but the string doesn't move when you push it in. If the string moves, your gap is smaller than your feeler gauge. If you can see that there's room under there between the feeler gauge and the string, then it's a little too big. So you adjust it that way. Once you've done that, you retune. You need to tune again. And we do this again in the playing position. Everything's done in the playing position. If you're not confident in adjusting the truss rod, get somebody that knows what they're doing to do it for you. You can break them if you over tighten them, or if they have a problem, you know. So the next part of the setup, once you've got that where you want it, so they're saying 15 to 17 inch radius of the fingerboard, the fretboard, 0.010. I use that on the 9.5. The 9.5 to 12 inch is 0.012, and the 7.25, which is a tighter radius, is 0.014. So you can see they're very close to each other. If I plucked harder or closer to the neck, I would probably need to have a little more relief and a little bit higher action here. As far as the action at the bridge, which adjusts the height of the strings, they say for this radius, 9.5 inch, it is 6 64ths or 3 32nds on the bass side, and on the treble side 5 64ths or 2 millimeters. That's a good setup. It's a good starting point. It's really great. You can look this up on the Fender website and get those measurements. And how we measure those, they say measure that at the 17th fret, from the top of the fret to the bottom of the string. How I do it, I put the capo on, I get a ruler that's graduated in 32nds and 64ths and millimeters and half millimeters if I want to do that. And I've got the capo, I put it across the last 2 frets so it's level, and there I can't do that here because it sort of rocks on the fret. You can't put it across too, it's too thin. You may be able to get a wider one, but I measure here and I look for between the top of the last fret and the bottom of the G string 2 32nds. On the E string I look for 5 64ths, and then for the 2 strings in the middle, it's somewhere in the middle between 2 32nds and 5 64ths. So I generally just go just over the line on of the 2/32, and I know that I'm there. Once I've got that set up, I retune. So you must always retune between these things. And then I have the relief set the way I want it. I have the saddle heights the way I want them, following the curve of the neck because we've measured that, getting slightly higher on the thicker strings, which works for me. If you need to adjust those up and down, you need the Allen wrench that fits your particular bridge saddles, and then you can screw them in or out to go higher or lower. Make sure that when you do that, you're keeping the saddle nice and flat going up and down, not kinked over to the sides or anything like that. So same number of turns if it's already flat, yeah? So once you have that, again you tune up. And the next thing to check is your intonation. So when I play the open G string and it's in tune, and I fret at the 12th fret with average pressure, or the pressure I normally play with, if you squeeze very hard you'll get it a little bit sharp. If you're very light, you're probably on the money, right? That G should be perfectly in tune like that one is, and they should all follow the same pattern. They should all be in tune. Now if they're not, if say for example the G string were a little bit sharp at the 12th fret, then that saddle needs to move that way, back towards the bottom of the bass, right? The back end of the bass. If it were flat, it would need to move back towards the neck. So what I would do there is loosen the string off, because you don't want too much pressure on the saddle while you're doing this. And there's a screw at the end here for each saddle, and you either tighten it to pull it back or loosen it to make it go forward. And there's some springs here that push it. Because this bass was set up the last time I changed strings, nothing's actually changed on it, because I put the same gauge and the same brand of strings on. So they're exactly the same, and it's fairly new, so nothing's really changed on it at all, and I'm pretty happy with the setup as it is. So in order of how we do things is take the strings off, clean the fretboard, clean the bass. If you have scratchy pots, well, you can do this anytime, but it's worth noting. I use, and I'm not affiliated with any brands here, or I just go for what works, and if it works for me, it'll probably work for you. I use some stuff called Deoxit. And what you do is take this control panel off. You'll see some little holes where the pins come out of the back of the pot covers, and you spray a tiny amount in there and turn that knob backwards and forwards all the way from end to end, and that should solve your problem. If it doesn't, it just means that the pot is too far gone. You can try that more than once. You can try 3 or 4 times, and if it's still scratchy, if they're sealed pots, and sealed pots you don't have any little openings at the back, you can take the knob off and just spray a tiny bit on the shaft, and it should trickle down, and it should give you the same or close to the same result. So in order of importance, not order of importance because they're all important, but in order of how we do it, we take the strings off, we clean the fretboard, clean up the bass, make sure everything's working, no problem, that's all good. I usually go around with a screwdriver, check that all the screws are tight, the strap locks, the string retainer, the strap lock on the bout end, the screws on the neck. I'll just tighten those up if they need tightening. It's part of my normal routine. And then you wipe down the fretboard so it's nice and clean. If there's any problems with the frets, get them addressed. If you can do fret dressing yourself and you're confident, that's fine. If you're not, just go and see a repairman. They can dress your frets if they're. You'll notice that where the strings touch them, they'll have little scallops in them, little divots. That's no good. They'll just wear down quicker if you don't get that done. And it keeps the surface nice and even so that you can get a proper setup. So once we put the strings on, we want to adjust the relief of the neck. In my case, 0.010 inches, that's my measurement. Once you've found your ideal measurements, write them down, because by the next time you do it, you may forget. So I write them down and I go back to them. And that's adjusted by the truss rod wrench through here. And you tighten it if you want to back bow the neck, and you loosen it if you want a forward bow, until you get that measurement where you want it. The next thing is put the capo on again, and measure with your ruler from the top of the fret to the bottom of the string, and I shoot for 3/30 seconds to 5/64 on the E string, 5/64 on the E, 2/30 seconds on the G, and then the other two somewhere in between that. So they're just slightly, as I'm going from the G to the E string, they're absolutely ever so slightly a little bit higher as they get fatter. Once we've done that, we check the intonation, we tune up, we check the 12th fret. And I see now I'm doing this and it's on the bench, it's showing a little bit sharp. And if I play the open G string, it's showing a little bit sharp because there's gravity forcing the neck down, you see. That's why we do it in the playing position. All this is done in the playing position. So once you have your intonation sorted out, that should be all well and good. The pickup heights don't really change. I think the idea of the pickup heights is 1/8 of an inch or something like that. You can look it up on the website. I don't really fiddle with those at all because I just find that wherever they're set at the factory is kind of right for me. And if the strings are up or down a little bit, doesn't really make an awful lot of difference anyway. If you get too close, especially on a passive bass, and you hit the string a little hard, you'll get this sort of thump out of the neck pickup. You'll actually hear this sort of thump through your speakers. If they're too far away, you don't get enough signal, so they've just got to be in the right sweet spot. But once you've set your bass up like that, and you find the gauge and the setup that you like, write it all down, keep notes. You may want to try a few different gauges of strings. You may want to try, instead of 0.010 relief, you might want to try 0.012. You may want to try 2.5 30 seconds on your G rather than 2, or 3 30 seconds if you're plucking harder or closer to the neck here. That is all very, very variable, and it will vary from player to player. The important part of doing this is, if I pick up another bass, particularly one that's the same style, like a jazz bass, and I set it up according to my measurements, it will feel the same. My P bass has a thicker neck. It feels slightly different. It's got a 7.25 inch radius fretboard. It takes action a little bit higher than this, a little bit higher, to cope with the extra curve on the fretboard. But once you find that ideal setup, write it all down, and you'll be able to get almost any bass to play exactly the same. If not, it will be very, have a familiar feel. Some people will say to me, "Oh, I can get my action to 1 millimeter at the 12th fret, at the 24th fret across all the strings," and that's fine. If you're playing gently and you're playing generally back here near the bridge, you can get away with that. And if that's what you do, that's fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with a higher action if you're playing here either. It's finding what works for you. The important part is this is all about what works for you. So now that we have this cleaned up and set up, we'll just plug it in and see that it sounds okay. That's the next step. Sounds fine. It feels the way I expect it to feel. It's in tune with itself, and as far as the the pickup height goes, I've just checked on the website, and it's saying if you fret it at the last fret, what you need is from the pole piece, top of the pole piece to the bottom of the string, 5/64ths on the treble side, 7/64ths on the bass side. And I can see that my bass side is a little high, so I'm probably going to go off and adjust that to about 7/64ths. Having done all that and said all that, I wanted to make this video short because there's a lot of good videos on YouTube on bass setup that go into quite a lot of detail and show you how to do it. The important thing to remember is I'm talking about a Fender bass, and most basses are the same. Some of them have the adjustment at this end of the neck. Some of them you can get to with an Allen wrench. Others you have to remove the neck to make the adjustment for the relief. Again, you'd have to remove it, adjust it, put it on, see how close you are, and you might have to do that a few times. And the other thing to bear in mind is that some basses, when you go anti-clockwise, they actually tighten and pull the neck straighter. So they work in reverse to this truss rod. So it's always good to make sure that you look up the manufacturer and find the specs of these things before doing any work. And this is a standard bridge, so it's really easy to work on with the Allen wrench. Same with the truss rod. Sometimes these things vary. You can get different, you can adjust string widths and all those types of things. Again, you have to look up that manufacturer and see what they recommend. But the important thing, all in all, is to get your setup the way you want it, write it down, use that setup, and you'll get that familiar feel. So it may take you a few goes to get to exactly what you want, but once you've gotten there, you know exactly how to get it again. So I hope this video has helped. I hope it hasn't been too long or too boring. Like I said, there's a lot more information that you can get. There's guys out there that'll show you how to do it, and it'll take 10-15 minutes for each section. I wanted to make it quick. If you're uncomfortable with doing any of that, go to a repair person. But if you can learn to do it yourself, it will save you quite a bit of money and quite a bit of time. And if you're on the road and you change gauge of strings or something like that, you will know how to adjust that bass so it feels familiar to you. Like I said, this is only a Squier. They're not an expensive bass, but it plays well. I take it to gigs all the time. It sounds fine, and that's largely because it's set up properly. If there's any questions, put them in the comments feed. I'm happy to answer them, and I'll see you at the next video. Maybe we'll actually run through a string change end to end, and I'll show you exactly how I do that. That's a few little tips there. Hope they help, and I'll see you guys next time. In the meantime, keep well, keep playing, keep having fun, keep making music. All the best.